Welcome to Riri Story Time. Today's episode is going to be on Charlotte Grabbe. Welcome to Riri's Story Time. Charlotte Gore Grabbe was born on January 31st, 1942 in Sullivan County in the state of Indiana, to parents Melvin and Margaret Gore. As she got into her teenage years, she would meet a man named Fred Grabbe. Unbeknownst to Margaret, Fred would be in her life forever. Fred was born on June 2nd, 1939, in West Terre Haute, Indiana. When I looked into the reports of this case, I saw that Fred and Charlotte did not have a smooth beginning. It's allegedly said that when Charlotte was 15 years old, her and Fred went on a date, and after their date, he sexually assaulted her. The outcome of that incident, Charlotte became pregnant, and she had no other option but to marry Fred. You know, in those days, being a single mother was frowned upon, unfortunately. In 1958, the couple welcomed their first baby boy, Jeffrey, and then the following year, the two welcomed a baby girl, and they named her Jenny. They had their boy, they had their girl, and their family just felt complete. So from the outside looking in, everything seemed like it was perfect. They had the perfect family. They resided in the country in this beautiful mansion. They also had their farm on their land as well. It was said that, both parents worked very hard, and due to their hard work, they were considered to be the upper echelon, as the Grabbe family was by far one of the wealthiest families in Marshall, Illinois at that time. Charlotte and Fred would continue their marriage for a total of 23 years. Now, during this 23-year time frame, they were able to put up this facade in front of family and friends. But they also got divorced at one point, and then they eventually got back together and remarried. But just like beauty is only skin deep and not everything that glitters is gold, it was said that their marriage had so much hatred and violence behind closed doors. So after giving their marriage a second try, they both felt like their marriage was just beyond fixable. Fred was caught again cheating on Charlotte. Charlotte kicked him out. He ended up moving into a cabin that just so happened to be located on their property. So it's like getting rid of him, but not really getting rid of him. Fred had this reputation of being abusive against, his wife. And the woman that Fred was having an affair with, she was 24-year-old Vicky McAllister. She was a bartender at a bar that Fred frequently visited. They were like 12 years apart. Nothing wrong with that. Fred did have Vicky come stay with him at the cabin. So one day when they were there, they were outside working, and then Fred told Vicky to go back inside. Margaret and Fred got into this argument, which led him to hit Charlotte, which he then started to choke her repeatedly. He would choke her, stop, choke her, and then she finally passed from him doing that. The sickening thing is that after he choked her to death, he sodomized her. On July 24th, 1981, sometime in the evening, her children noticed that, their mom didn't return home. Jenny immediately knew something was wrong. They all always came home at the same time. They had this routine where they were consistent with. But when Charlotte didn't show up, they went looking for her. Jenny and Jeff went to the field and started looking for their mom, and they saw her tractor, and they also found her lunch that she had did for that day. It was untouched. That really worried the children even more. Jenny went back home and she called the Clark County Sheriff's Department. She reported her mother missing. And of course, with Fred being her ex-spouse, who happens to reside on the same property, would be questioned by the police. Fred stated to the police that the last time he had saw Charlotte that they did get into a heated argument, but he saw her driving towards the interstate and didn't have any knowledge where she was headed. Just a few days later, they would find Charlotte's car in Terre Haute, Indiana. And that's about 16 miles across the border. Police did search her vehicle. They didn't find any sign of blood. They didn't find any foul play. They did find a loaded handgun under her seat. They also found a letter that was in Charlotte's handwriting. And then later that day, a neighbor came forward and said they saw Fred driving towards Terre Haute, and behind him was Charlotte's car. It was a woman with blonde hair, and Charlotte has dark brown hair. So later in the search, investigators would find that 10 days prior of Charlotte going missing, she was placing notes in a safe deposit box at a bank. And in the notes, she felt that Fred was stealing farm equipment and how she didn't feel safe. She didn't think she was going to make it through this divorce. In another note that was found, she just stated that she was intimidated by him and his partner Dale. The police did question Dale, and Dale claimed that he was with Fred and they had their alibi. So the sheriff would eventually bring Vicky and Fred to a grand jury, but neither one of them, they pled the fifth. They used that Fifth Amendment. Jenny went as far as asking her father to take a lie detector test, but he refused. The police had no new leads, so eventually after 3 years, that case would go cold. Jenny got tired of waiting, and her husband would go hire a private investigator named Charles Pearson. Charles knew that that woman who was driving that car with the blonde hair would be Vicky McAllister. So he found out that Vicky and Fred had broke up and that she was now residing in Terre Haute. So Vicky was still working at, a bar. There's only two things that Vicky liked to do. That was to play pool and drink. And he started going to, the bar where she worked and befriended her. And then after a while, he just stopped being friends with her and he told her who he really was. And right when she heard that he was a private investigator, she told him immediately, I need to get this off my chest. She went through the story and let him know that she was indeed the one who was driving Charlotte's car and the events that transpired that day. It literally made her physically ill when she was telling the story. Vicky states that she was in the machine shed that day, and her and Fred were getting these metal 55-gallon barrels for farm work. And while Fred was walking out of the shed, he saw Charlotte and they got into it. Well, the argument was taking place. Charlotte walked into the shed and Fred followed her, and that's where the argument escalated. Vicky said that in Fred's eyes, she could see the anger and the rage, and he was choking her with his bare hands. Again, he was doing this, choking her, letting her go, choking her, letting her go, until she eventually was strangled to death. And she did confirm that Fred did rape his ex-wife's corpse while she watched. When he was done, he grabbed Charlotte's lifeless body and filled her up and grease in every orifice of her body and put her in this gallon, this 55-gallon, and then put her in his truck. After all that transpired, that's when Fred had instructed her to follow him over the border to Indiana, and that's why the police were able to find her car in Terre Haute. So, excuse me, they dropped the car off, and when they started driving back to Illinois, they parked by the Wabash River. This is where they take Charlotte's body out of the truck and they placed it under a maple tree. They poured diesel fuel all over the barrel to cover Charlotte's body and then proceeded to set it on fire. While her body was on fire, Fred and Vicky just watched the riverbank as her body was on fire. The next morning, they heard that they had a search unit looking for Charlotte. So they literally went back to that maple tree. They grabbed her body, put it back in the barrel, and when sunset came, they went back to the maple tree and burned her body again. The only thing that was left was her skull. And Fred told Vicky, this makes good fish food, and threw her skull on the riverbank. Now, her story was helpful, but unfortunately, no evidence until a plant biologist and an organic chemist got put in with investigators on this case. You see, diesel fuel is very highly toxic to a tree, and if the tree died in that area, it would show that. If either it progressed, if you know when you cut a tree, you have the circles, it tells you how old the tree is. So what they did was they cut some of the tree branches. They took 5 samples, and it surely did show that the tree hasn't grown in the past 3 years. And that alone was able to hold a conviction. And Fred was found of first-degree murder, 75 years in prison, without the possibility of parole. But it doesn't end there. He files an appeal. And just 1 month prior to the second appearance, their son, Jeff, went missing. He testified against his father. He was supposed to be in California on a business trip and all of a sudden disappeared. But regardless, he still got sentenced to 75 years in prison, but they did allow him to be eligible for parole in 2022, this year in July. 1 month after the trial, they did unfortunately find Jeff's body, and he had 3 bullet wounds, and there was an anchor tied to his ankle to keep his body weight down. And it just makes me wonder, do you think that a father would kill his own son just to keep his secret a secret from the world? As always, I thank you for joining me today. Please don't forget to hit the like button, the notification button, the subscribe button, and let me know in the comments below, what are your thoughts on this case? I think this guy was highly sick to do the things that he did. From after his wife's body was, I mean, just the things that he did was just, gruesome that's my opinion, but I would like to hear yours. And again, I thank you for spending time with me today. And as always, don't let anyone steal your joy.